With me now is Dr. Adrian Boyle, President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine and consultant in emergency medicine in Cambridge. Adrian, you've been working on violence reduction for some time.
So this has been an interest of mine for many years, and it was sparked partly by doing my MD, but also on my first weekend on call as a consultant. I saw two people who'd been pretty seriously injured. One had his nose broken, lost a couple of teeth and a big split lip. And I thought this was going to go to court. So I took a photo and got it into the notes. And likewise, I saw somebody else who'd actually been stamped on in the groin and had sustained horrible genital injuries. Again, I thought that was going to go to court. And yet I was never asked to provide a witness statement. Looking into it, there's an awful lot of violent injury that the police never know anything about. And at the time, I was reading scientific papers about this. And I thought, is there another way to try and stop this? And I started reading the work that Jonathan Shepherd had done in Cardiff. I was asked to review one of his papers, which was about starting receptionists to identify where assaults were happening. I became a consultant in 2005, and at the time we had terrible IT systems. There was no coding system that would allow this. The more I looked into the scientific literature, I could see that this was a fairly easy thing to get right. Of people who go to hospital, to emergency departments after assault, police only know about a quarter of those. That's less if it's a domestic violence case, more, thankfully, if you've been murdered or shot at. But actually, there's that vast amount of injury that the police never know anything about. And that, to me, means we need to let other people know what's going on to try and prevent some of this.
What does that mean? How would that help reduce violence?
So the police are actually very sophisticated in the way that they analyse the data that they've got about their activity, where they target patrols. They'll do work with the Community Safety Partnership to redeploy CCTV cameras, but they're only as good as the information that's given to them. This intervention isn't about everyone jumping into a panda car and going around and arresting someone. It's actually about saying, this is a place that we know is a hotspot for violence. What can we do to make that safer to prevent the next assaults?
Have you got any examples?
Yes, so we identified from the emergency department data quite quickly that there was a problem at one of our local McDonald's, and it was always happening on Saturday morning at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I showed it to a police officer and he goes, well, of course, because he can see things that I can't because he's got that local context. And it was people who'd been kicked out of the nightclubs for being drunk and disorderly or hadn't got into nightclubs who were going around the corner and congregating outside and getting into fights in this particular fast food place. So the solution was actually to put a CCTV camera and adjust a patrol to wander down that street at about the time. And we could tell them that it was going to happen somewhere between 2 and 3:30 every morning. And all they had to do was walk down, and the problem just went away.
So I wondered how that kind of knowledge sharing can help police in supporting domestic violence victims, because it's a different mechanism.
Some people will tell the receptionist that they've been assaulted, but it's pretty unusual. I mean, people disclosing domestic abuse is really difficult. We've got to be realistic. It's like all information. You've got to understand how the data's been collected. It tells us a little bit, but it's not a strong intervention. The idea that somebody who's suffering an abusive relationship is going to disclose that to a receptionist who they've never met before, there's no particular trust or no particular rapport or relationship with that person, and they're in a queue of people going on behind them, I find that harder to buy. Where I think it comes into its own is around the community violence, sometimes the gang assaults. One of our local supermarkets wanted to start selling alcohol 24 hours a day, and it was right opposite our homeless shelter. And the police had said, no, you can't do this. And it had gone to appeal. So at this point, I was asked to bring the emergency department data. I spoke to my friends in the ambulance service. They also brought all the data about the call-outs they'd had to this place. And as a result, that particular supermarket lost the legal case. It lost its appeal, and they were not allowed to sell alcohol directly opposite a homeless shelter 24 hours a day. Now, it sounds almost ridiculous that they had to go through that process because it sounds such a common sense thing that you shouldn't allow that. As a result, first of all, it was the first time that a supermarket had lost the ability to sell alcohol on appeal. First time they'd lost an appeal. They had to pay costs to the county council and the licensing authority, and that problem, again, got no worse.
Let's talk about ambulance data. Is that also part of the picture?
So it's happening a bit. The ambulance data is automated. So when an ambulance turns up to a scene, I don't quite know how it works, but they press a button and it's GPS recorded. So they can actually give very, very accurate data about where an assault has occurred. We've done research studies on this, and we know that a lot of assaults, only the ambulance service know about it. The police don't know about it, and also they don't always take all their assault victims to an emergency department. So actually, the ambulance data provides yet another unique perspective. We did a study up in Wolverhampton, and we found that there was a completely different population that the ambulance service knew about. There are slight problems. Ambulance data is almost too good because, particularly if it's called to a domestic assault or an assault at a home address, that can become person identifiable. And one of the problems with this is you should not be sharing person identifiable data.
How are we going to get around that with the ambulances?
There are processes you can do. If you've got a list of GPSs, rather than pinpointing it to within 10 metres, you can pinpoint it to within 30 metres or 50 metres. And that still can be useful information, but also people have to use this data appropriately. And the whole point about sharing this with crime analysts is it's not about crime detection, it's about crime prevention.
And that's the thing, isn't it? People who were already cautious and reluctant to engage with authorities, how do we persuade them that this is in their best interest, that we need this information to work towards broader violence reduction? How do we get the trust?
Not everyone will tell you. This is not a research study. You don't need perfect data for this to be useful and actionable. So the college says that as an audit standard, usable data in about 70% of cases, because sometimes people don't want to give that information. And that's fair enough. We've got to respect people's autonomy.
What are the numbers like right now? Where are we in terms of trends of violence and crime?
So it's quite a complicated and nuanced picture. Certainly, the hospitals that have got engaged with this Cardiff model and have done it well have seen substantial reductions. So in my own hospital, we've managed to reduce the number of assaults we see per year from about 1,300 down to just under 600. And that's been over the 20-year period. We've managed to keep that going. So we've taken out nearly 50% of all the assaults that we see. So I think that's a really good positive result. The picture nationally is quite nuanced. Violent crime over generations is actually declining. Apparently, the most dangerous time to be a victim of violence was in the 1970s, and there's been a steady decline since then. There are groups which are going up. I think we're all worried about teen knife crime, and certainly that seems to be an emerging problem. But the overall picture is of gradually becoming safer, which is a good thing.
First of all, how did you get your numbers in your hospital down to that? I mean, that's really impressive. Appreciate it's over a 20-year period, lots and lots of hard work. But what were the key elements that got you there?
So I think some of this was sharing the information with the right people, getting the right people around the table. We turn data into information, but that will only get you so far. It's about making sure you're giving it to the right people and having that good working relationship. So I know our two licensing officers and our community safety sergeant at Cambridge Constabulary, and from time to time we'll go and just sit down and go through the data and say, what is this saying? So a lot of this is actually about relationships and making sure your data is going to the people who can take action.
How are you going to build on this success?
I think one is to try and routinely get the ambulance data as part of this. It's already there. It's sitting in servers of the various ambulance trusts around the country, and just organising the flow to the right people who can do stuff about it, I think would be a huge step. There's then a piece about trying to get other hospitals to do it. Now, we've had a number of pushes over this over a number of years. The best we've ever got to was about 60% of emergency departments doing this well. But people move on, systems change, people move on it within our community safety partnerships. So it is a bit like painting the fourth bridge.
Let me get that right. Was it violent crime that was going down?
Yeah, violent crime is on a steady downward trajectory. I mean, there's absolutely at-risk populations within that. This is an avoidable thing. So violent crime is never really acceptable, even if it's less than it was the year before. The proportion of teenagers involved in knife crime is going up, and we've seen graphs. They're tragic, but the absolute numbers of those are small. Those are clearly a group which have got to get some attention. You know, there's nothing worse than seeing some young boy who has, it's almost a young boy who has been stabbed to death. It's so preventable. There was that awful case in Birmingham. There was another one in Sheffield recently. And, we would love to try and contribute to the ways to try and stop that.
When you say it's preventable, how? It's multi-agency, multi-stakeholder, multi-level initiative, and not everyone or everything is joined up at the moment.
Yes, and this is a classic wicked problem. No single intervention is going to be transformative. But I think actually the structures we've got with the violence reduction units, the coordination, the multi-agency approach, that really helps. There's a whole bunch of interventions that work. A lot of these are actually upstream, and they're before people getting into trouble. So that'll involve things like going right back to what we do at the very beginning of someone's life. Sure start, providing a safe upbringing, intervening quickly when there's things like adverse child experiences, keeping people safe, trying to tackle safely parental domestic violence. All of these things we know are drivers to increase somebody's risk of becoming a victim of violence. There's a bit about weapon control, the stuff that we've seen around all those ridiculous and hideous zombie knives. That's a good thing to do.
Some of the successes actually start from within the emergency department. We've had great work from agencies like the St. Giles Trust. A lot of these initiatives are now being hit by budget. I've been speaking to colleagues where they are really choked by the fact that these essential services, where they have seen progress being made, are being cut. And that's really a blow when we're trying to tackle things and prevent that same patient coming back in a week or two later.
Yeah, and those advocacy interventions, I mean, there's an emergency evidence base. I used to be quite sniffy about the benefit of them, but I think they've actually done a lot of the work to show benefit. Remember that a homicide costs millions of pounds in terms of on costs, whether it's the investigation, if somebody gets incarcerated and imprisoned for a long period of time, the cost of that are extraordinary. I mean, they talk about being detained at Her Majesty's pleasure is more expensive each year than fees at Eton. You know, this is good preventative work, and actually you don't have to prevent very many homicides for this to become extremely cost effective.
So how do you, in your role, support the specialty, the people that are working?
This is a tough time. There is no money. There's less money than there was the year before. It's a very tough time. But we keep advocating not only for staff, but also because fundamentally at the end, it's about our patients.
Violence reduction is a part of emergency medicine. It's not all of emergency medicine. Is a lot being asked.
This is about targeting the right people. Not all my colleagues have to know about the nuts and bolts of how the community safety partnership works. One consultant takes that on as his responsibility to liaise with the local community safety partnership. The receptionists, they're the guys who need that change management and support to start recording that data. There's only a few other people who need to make this work. I would say that this has got to be in the box of working smarter, not harder. But it also aligns with government parties. We're constantly hearing that we need to go from sickness to prevention. Well, if this isn't about prevention, I don't know what is.
Here's the thing. Do you think that in terms of working smarter, not harder, is there a role for technology?
What we're seeing around a number of departments is automated check-in. So people check themselves in with an iPad. And I was worried when this happened because I thought actually we might not get good recording of information. But actually the work's been done, and it shows that if it's configured properly, people will give better information about where they've been assaulted.
Is that being implemented?
I think we're going to see these automated check-ins come all over the place. It's pretty routine in GP surgeries now. And I think it's coming into emergency departments. It's not for everyone. Where you implement them, somewhere about 20 to 30% of people will use them. I still think that's valuable, and it saves a bit of nurse time.
And in terms of research, obviously data gathering and research has got us this far. Where are the gaps in research? What would you like to be seeing done?
I think we probably need to do some more work around understanding the effectiveness of advocacy interventions. Not so much about the effectiveness, but the cost effectiveness. Someone needs to do the health economics on it, because I'm convinced we'd find that's really effective. We also need to think about the various typologies of violence and where these interventions work for this, because there's a tendency, a bit like sepsis, for everything to get lumped together. I don't think this is an intervention that works terribly well for domestic abuse. It works very well for community violence. It works very well for nighttime economy violence. I'm uncertain as to how well this will work for teen knife violence.
Adrian, imagine this. You've been given all the resources that you could possibly want and need to tackle this head on. What would you implement within the first 24 hours?
I would create some time to get the right people around the table to build relationships, because this is absolutely around that multi-agency working. And increasingly, the power of local relationships must not be underestimated. And it's just giving people the time and the headspace and the protected time to develop those relationships. That will be beginning, start and end of this.